From Evoke Media, I'm Sabrina Miraj Naeem. With me is Cassia Binkowski, and this is Breaking Glass, a series of conversations with women around the world who are shattering glass ceilings and challenging social norms. They are audacious, gutsy, and their stories are echoed across borders and generations in a rallying cry that is changing the narrative for women everywhere. Today we're speaking with writer, artist, and psychotherapist Esther Amini. Esther's family immigrated from Mashhad, Iran to New York City before she was even born, but she still spent a lifetime navigating those two conflicting realities. That of a conservative Jewish Iranian daughter whose only aspirations should be to marry and to mother, and that of a curious child who grew into an accomplished woman and a professional with accolades and a strong will.
Yet again, Sabrina, we are joined by a guest whose life experience is so radically different than my own. Truth be told, I had no idea the secrecy and oppression that Jews were living under in Mashhad, Iran, nor the trauma that has impacted so many generations of her family and beyond. Esther's story is about finding herself straddling two conflicting cultures, about how secrets have shaped her and generations that came before her, and how she has defined womanhood on her own terms rather than on the expectations placed around her.
May we all be so bold. Take a listen. Esther, thank you so much for joining us from Manhattan today. We're really excited to have this conversation.
Thank you, Sabrina. I'm looking forward to our talk.
Absolutely. So, Esther, you are not the first woman of Iranian descent that we've had on this show. You're also not the first author we've had on this show. But what is unique about you and what we're excited to kind of delve into is exploring your roots, your family history in a particular region of Iran called Mashhad, which has a very unique history. And the memoir that you wrote about that family history between Iran and then the U.S. and a lot of the kind of dynamics and complexity that exists in between those two regions and multiple generations of your family. So I'd like to start the conversation with really your family's roots in Mashhad. You wrote the book Concealed, a memoir of a Jewish Iranian daughter caught between the Chador and America, which detailed your story as the daughter of immigrants and their story of a trauma they really could never escape. So paint a picture for us of the lives as Mashhadi Jews, the lives of your family, and maybe even more broadly, the community of Jews that lived in that region, who survived kind of, a lot of trauma for multiple generations.
Well, I should begin by saying I was born in New York City unto Jewish Iranian parents, as you said, who came from Mashhad. But Mashhad is distinctly different from all the other cities in Iran. So a little background needs to be inserted. Mashhad is the most fanatical Islamic city in all of Iran. Reason being, the 9th century Imam Reza was buried there, and millions of people come to pay homage to him from around the world. And so the soil of Mashhad is considered sacred, holy. Mashhad is a Shiite stronghold, a pilgrimage site with a long history of maiming and massacring infidels. So they have zero tolerance for anyone who's different, who is not Muslim, making it very difficult to live there if you are different. And so my parents and my ancestors for many generations lived there as crypto-Jews, as underground Jews, hiding their true identity. This life of duplicity, duality, paranoia went right into their DNA.
How large was that community? Are we talking hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands? Like how big?
It's a good question. I don't know the exact number, but I would guess when my parents were there, and they were there through the mid-20th century, that there were about 500 to maybe 800 Jews living as crypto-Jews. They lived in a ghetto called Eidgah, And it was a charade because the Muslims knew who the Jews were. And yet the Jews were parading as Muslims. My mother wore the black chador, which is the burqa with eye slits, black covering her from head to toe. And my father prayed from the Quran 5 times a day in the public square and knew the Quran like the back of his hand. And yet, when he came home, in the privacy, secrecy of their home, they were devout Jews.
And just for the sake of our listeners, it's important to make the distinction that in other regions of Iran, particularly during that time, this was not the case. There was a pretty large Jewish population in Iran who lived in different cities throughout the country and who never had to, in the same way, hide their identity, particularly before the 1979 revolution, where, there was much more of a kind of a freedom of religion and diversity. And this is a very unusual story of one community in one region of the country. And what's important that we're going to get into is how that they're being forced to hide their identity for multiple generations. They're being forced to, as you say, being crypto Jews, then impacted subsequent generations, which I'm interested in hearing about as well. But the fact that your father went and prayed in the public square 5 times a day with the other Muslim residents. I mean, for someone like me, whose family is also from Iran, who are also Jews, it is mind-boggling to think about because it's just so different.
So different, so different. To add to that picture, women in Mashhad, young girls in Mashhad, were kept out of classrooms, were kept out of schools. They were kept illiterate. This was not going on in the mid-20th century in Tehran, the capital of Iran. Girls in Tehran who were coming out of affluent families were being sent to Swiss boarding schools. In Mashhad, girls were kept illiterate. Not the boys. The boys were allowed to learn to read and write, but the girls were kept illiterate, and they were also married off at a very young age. My grandmother, for example, was 9 years old. This is my father's mother, 9 years old when she was forced to marry my grandfather, 20 years older. And it's important to stop and think about that for a minute. Just imagine a 9-year-old girl standing next to a 29-year-old man and being married off to him. That was the norm in Mashhad.
And your mother's story wasn't much different. She was only slightly older, is that right?
That's right. She was 14, forced to marry my father, who was 34. This was the norm in the Muslim world, and the Jews did this as well, partly to look like everyone else, partly in case a Muslim should knock on their door and ask for the hand of a young girl, they can say she's spoken for, and that was acceptable and understandable.
So I want to just pause you there because I think that's a really important distinction. That part of the reason, like you said, was for them to blend in, but the, I think, more important part was they were marrying their children off to each other very early on so that there wouldn't be intermarriage with other kind of the Muslim community, and it was their way of protecting their community. And as an outsider, you think, okay, it makes sense, and that's bonkers, right? Because these are children, and you have to kind of you have to separate yourself from the current environment that we live in, where we know that marrying a 9-year-old off is wrong, and acknowledge that there were protective mechanisms in place at the time that they felt were necessary.